Hello, everybody. This is Robert, and thank you for tuning in to the show. And my first audio only interview in a while. But regardless, we're gonna make the best of it. And today we have somebody who, and this is gonna be very exciting for Animaniacs fans because we have somebody who has worked on the original show, and he's worked on so many Warner Brothers shows since then, and he's got an extensive background in animation. So we have Mr. Kirk Tingblad that is joining me today, and we're just going to be shooting the breeze and talk about all things animation. So thank you so much for joining me, and yeah, it's a huge pleasure that we finally got. Today is finally the day that we're, doing this because there's been a lot of like rescheduling conflicts and so much that has been going on. But regardless, I'm finally here, and we're just, glad that we're finally able to do this. So thank you so much for
Yeah,
joining me.
yeah. Well, that's nice. Too bad we couldn't get the video to work, but we're still here.
Yeah, absolutely. I just am really glad that, things are going well because I know we've kind of talked a little bit beforehand about what's been happening in your life and, with graduations and everything in between. So I just wanted to wish you congrats once again with everything that you're doing. And yeah, it's just gonna be like, this is a lot of fun. So we're just gonna make the best of it, and we're just gonna talk about your career and, sharing advice and all that good stuff.
Sure.
Yeah, so with your background in cartooning and animation, like, what is kind of like your little story of how actually first how you became interested in animation and upon getting your start in the industry?
Well, when I was a kid, they used to have kid shows on the major networks in the morning and after school sometimes on some channels. And they would show cartoons, like three or four cartoons in a half an hour. And anyway, one time when I was about, I don't know, 9 or 10 maybe, one of the shows aired Porky and Wacky Land. And I just thought that was the greatest thing ever made. And I wanted to find out how you made it and all that stuff. I seen the Wonderful World of Disney every Sunday night, but this seemed a lot funnier to me. So anyway, as I got older, I got interested in science fiction movies and animation movies and comic books. In fact, when I graduated high school, I was accepted to the Kubert School in New Jersey. And I went there for a year. And one of the classes I had there was taught by Milt Neal, who was an old time Disney animator from the Snow White days. And I ended up having a disagreement with the people who ran the school. So I went to the University of Minnesota Duluth here in Minnesota, and I worked on the paper as an editorial cartoonist. So that was fun, but at that time there was about 90 working editorial cartoonists across the country, and basically every time a job would open up, 75 of them would apply. So it's a pretty hard field to break into. And then now there's only like two or three that have their own cartoonist anymore. And so part of my major, I had to take an internship with a advertising agency. And one day, the sales rep for this studio called Bajas Jones Film Corp dropped off their latest tape, and I watched it and like, wow, I was really surprised that decent animation was being made in the state I was in. So I called them up cold. I didn't have any information really, but I talked to the owner and I talked him into letting me have an interview because he said things were awful slow right then. So the next Friday, I went down there and showed him my portfolio, and he really liked it. And he asked me if I had ever done animation. I said, "Oh, I did a few things when I was at the art school, but not much since then. And he said, well, here, let's go in the back. We went back there. We found an animation table, and he drew a couple of pigs on it, pages of one pig looking one way and then that pig looking the other way. And then he made a graph on where the in-between drawing should be. And he said, go ahead and do this. So I sat down and I knew what in-betweening was and everything. But, here's the guy who I'm trying to get to hire me. And he's like standing over my shoulder watching me draw. So I was able to ape his style really well. And the in-betweens worked. So as soon as they started getting work, which happened on the Wednesday following my graduation from school, I started working doing commercials in Minneapolis at Regis Jones. And I worked there for like 4 years, and then I freelanced and worked for an an educational cartoonist for about 2 years. And eventually, doing a bunch of freelance stuff, I found out that this place in Canada was doing animation. They were looking for help, and that was a place called Kennedy Cartoons that did the really kind of rubbery stuff that was in the first year of Tiny Toon Adventures. So I did a bunch of assistant work for them, and I did some animation on a Hanna-Barbera show called Don Coyote, which is really forgettable, but it got me to do animation. And then that ended, and a friend of mine called me and said there's this place in Chicago looking for people. So I called them up and they said go ahead and send some stuff, and I got some stuff together, sent it down to them. So they wanted to hire me, so I went down there and worked out a deal and started working at StarToons. And I did that for 2 years, working on 2 Tiny Toons, Tasmania. And after that Tasmania is done, John McClanahan had Spike Brandt and myself out for pizza, and he told us he was making us directors because he couldn't do it all of it himself. And we got to pick out a little crew among the people who were working there. And I ended up directing like 4 episodes of Animaniacs. And then the work dried up. So I got laid off, and the guys who were still there at the studio were getting half pay, which, is pretty brutal when you have a mortgage to make and everything. But I got out to LA and showed my stuff around, and after a day I gotten hired to work on a show called The Critic. Now Disney wanted to hire me, but they didn't have the show ready to hire me for like 3 months. So I worked on 2 episodes of The Critic, and then the LA earthquake in 93 happened, or 94, January 94. And it was after that I started over at Disney and worked on Quack Pack, which was a Donald Duck property, which was really fun for me because Donald was of the Disney characters, he was always my favorite. And then that got done, and the guys I'd worked with at StarToons had since then moved out to LA because they couldn't work for half pay. And one of them was involved in the setting up the storyboards for Space Jam, the original one. And so I went down there, and since they known me as a director on Animaniacs, I didn't have to interview or anything. They just hired me on the spot. And then we started working on Space Jam. And then after that, I got hired to direct Pinky and the Brain. And when that dried up, I went and I was Van Parble created Johnny Bravo. And after 1 season, they fired him. And so they hired me and Gary Hartle and Jed Spingarn and Gene Brillo, and we were kind of the core of the next two seasons of Johnny Bravo then. And that was just so much fun to work on. It was like I the StarToons people that became friends of mine and making Johnny Bravo were like the two biggest highlights of my career because I just had so much fun doing it. And on Johnny Bravo, we didn't work from a script. They the writers would submit outlines and get an outline approved, and then we'd all go in what we call our story room, and we would basically rough out an entire short in one day with the writers writing all the dialogue, and Gary Hartle and myself doing all the rough sketches on how every shot should look. And that way, since we had a small budget and mostly had brand new storyboard artists that never really done it before, they had all the shots figured out for them already. All they basically had to do is clean them up and add acting to the dialogue. And after that, that's when I really started to freelance mostly on doing animation direction, which is it's also called timing direction or sheet timing, which is like the last thing you do before you ship a cartoon off to overseas, is you do all the timing direction. And boy, you can make or break the cartoon with how good the timing director is. But I was working on that, and I got nominated like 3 times for Pinky and the Brain for an Emmy, and once for Animaniacs. And the last Pinky and the Brain we got nominated for, we won. So that was pretty cool. So I got an Emmy award, and also for directing on the first season of Animaniacs, I got a Peabody Award, which is kind of a highfalutin award to get for animation. They don't give it out that often because they basically give out the Peabody for an animation show if it was crucial to how animation is done. If you're breaking through and doing something really different, you might get a Peabody, and we got one. So that was kind of a cool little thing. And after I'd been doing animation direction for about 10 years, I started to have pains in my back. And they kept getting worse and worse. So I went to the doctor, and I went through all these different doctors. Finally went to a spine surgeon, and he had me do a body scan. They found out that I had a birth defect at the lower part of my spine and my hips. And he said, we're going to have to operate on this as soon as possible. So I went into surgery 2 days later and got a spine fusion. And it saved me the use of my legs. So that was great that worked out. But the problem was in doing that operation, I had my nerves damaged. So the nerves send a signal up to my brain 24/7 that my hips and my tailbone are broken. So I'm in constant pain. So I had to quit the business, and we moved back here to be close to our son, and because he owns and is a chef for a restaurant in a town about 20 minutes from here in Lake City, Minnesota. So because of this disability, I basically have to lay down on a Tempur-Pedic mattress 95% of the day. So I read a lot. And that's kind of where I am right now.
Wow. Yeah, I was just asking, like, how did you get into anime? And then I just pretty much, I think we could pretty
There's
much
the
just wrap
whole
up this
story.
interview right here. You got your whole thing. Boom. There you go. Bada bing, bada boom. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's a couple of things that I wanted to go back to, like just to
Uh-huh.
elaborate more on because I know
Sure.
that you got your start watching, Porky and Wacky Land, which was yeah, I think that was one of the shorts that I think it was one of Clampett's first shorts that he did. For those that don't know, Bob Clampett, one of the he pretty much did like Great Piggy Bank Robbery, and he did a lot of the Looney Tunes where it was pretty much the wackiest, looniest of the
Yeah.
of the Looney Tunes shorts. And I think if you watch like the newer Looney Tunes stuff, they really are doing a throwback to the Clampett shorts with not just with the character designs, the stories, and the even the acting where they are mimicking. They're trying to recreate that because when you listen to the recordings that Mel Blanc did, because Blanc had to record on a stage and you could really hear those echoes, and that's something that they're trying to do with the newer stuff. So I feel like Clampett because people always talk about Chuck Jones or Frayling, Tex Avery, those directors,
Yeah.
McKimson, but Clampett. I'm really glad that people are starting to talk more about Clampett and they're doing more shorts that are more like, especially with Daffy Duck, like Daffy is going back to its more like the loonier, like the crazy woohoo, 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 that stuff, and they're breaking away from the greedy, the greedy, selfish jerk that we often see with a lot of the Warner Brothers stuff. But now they're going back to it's a throwback to a lot of the Clampett, Avery, that stuff from the 40s. So I
Mhm.
wanted to bring all of that up because, like with Porky and Wacky Land, that was kind of like the first like big like Clampett's first major short that he did that ended up becoming a classic. Like if you talk to anybody of like, oh, what's the best Bob Clampett short? It's either that, the Piggy Bank with Daffy, or just yeah. He was pretty much one of the main directors, like one of the major spearheaders from the Golden Age, and I'm
Yeah, it
just
was
really
kind
glad
of
that
funny
somebody
back
brought.
then because they hired both Chuck Jones and Bob Clampett to direct at about the same
Yeah.
time.
Hmm.
And here Bob Clampett was doing all this weird, wonderful stuff. And Chuck Jones, when he started directing, was trying to do Disney. If you look at those old Sniffles cartoons, he's so sweet. And, oh God, he's so cute. You just went. In fact, I killed Sniffles in Space Jam. I wrote and storyboarded that sequence where Michael Jordan calls on a substitute and Sniffles comes out and one of the bad guys smashes him to death with a basketball. So there was a certain amount of joy in getting rid of Sniffles there. But yeah, I always liked the Clampett stuff a little bit better. I mean the Chuck Jones cartoons are great. Once he got going on Bugs Bunny in the middle 40s through the middle 50s, you can't touch them. They're fantastic.
Yeah, each director really brought their own style to the characters. You
Yeah.
pretty much got Avery, Tex Avery, who is often credited to be the one who directed the first official Bugs Bunny short, which was A Wild Hare
Mm-hmm.
in 1940. And then since then, it was kind of like that was during the time when animation was really starting to enter like it was having its peak, and it all just kind of cultivated with World War II, and in the 40s was kind of like the golden time for pretty much all the animation studios. I mean, you got Disney, MGM, there is the Popeye shorts, Walter Lantz and all of those studios. And
Mm-hmm.
going back to Warner Brothers, I mean, I was just saying that each director brought their own spin to the characters. Like, for instance, Bugs or Daffy or whoever is directing the short, like, they all brought their own unique directing styles to it. Like, Avery
Yeah.
kind of started off with, the kind of like the streetwise, street smart type of comedy that he put into his shorts. And then Clampett, was often going for like the characters having like these big crazy expressions and just distorted and having these simple stories, but the execution is just absolutely insane. And like I said, they're doing it for the new Looney Tunes stuff. And then you got Chuck Jones, who was the director who was kind of the most, I mean, he was definitely the most famous. I don't know, but
Hmm.
he was definitely the most recognizable style because when you see his, um, because when people talk Chuck Jones, they don't really speak about, the earlier Disney style that he was trying to imitate, and then he started coming into his own in the late 40s, 50s.
Yeah.
Like we talk about that Chuck Jones, where he was making some of the, shorts that really focus on like the character-based comedy, the writing, with Mike Maltese and a lot of his unit that was making the shorts. They talk about the shorts where, Duck Dodgers, What's Opera Dog, Duck Amok. Those are definitely classics. One Froggy Evening, and, a lot of those
Yeah.
shorts that, he did at the time. And, Frayling is also another one, Frizz Frayling. He also directed a lot of the, Twin Kids and Sylvester shorts, but I think his shorts also had some of the most brilliant timing out of all of them, and he was also
Hmm.
the music guy. And then McKimson was kind of more like, you know, I think his shorts are kind of more like, how can I put this? He definitely relied on the heavy slapstick comedy at first, then he was kind of like the parody type of dude where he started making cartoons that were just kind of parodies of like popular TV shows. But yeah, and then of course he made Foghorn Leghorn, who is probably my
Yeah.
favorite Looney Tune of them all. And yeah, so he kind of did a lot of those shorts, but they were hilarious. And I
Hmm.
think he made shorts for dads because even my dad kind of really loved those Foghorn stuff and Tom and Jerry. Like, and Popeye, like we used to kind of watch, those old shows together and we would just kind of bond over them. That's kind of something that I wanted to, say out there. Dad, if you're watching this, love you, man. When are we gonna start watching those Popeye? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So yeah, those were pretty much the good old days. And then fast forward to the, when you first got your start in animation, like Hanna-Barbera, like I know that was also when you hear the name Hanna-Barbera, it's kind of like, it's kind of like, how can I put this? Hanna-Barbera were really pioneers of like TV animation, but at the same time, they were pumping out shows like No Tomorrow. So it's like, oh yeah, I remember those days. Like I used to get up every Saturday morning and watch, Yogi Bear or Scooby Doo and what have you. But then you talk to the
Right.
people that worked on these shows, and it's like, you know what I'm saying? But no, I mean they're fine. Like I mean, I'm not gonna say that they made the worst animation, but they gave us timeless characters. That's all I'm gonna say. And plus, those shows
Yeah.
in the '90s, just chef's kiss. I mean, Dexter, Johnny Bravo, Powerpuff Girl, like. Man, so much that they made, in the '90s was kind of like the Renaissance, which really
Yeah.
was the Renaissance of animation back in the day. Yeah.
Yeah. And it kind of Barbera kind of morphed into Cartoon Network. And
Yep.
then
Yep. Yep.
well, in the last year, Warner Brothers had just absorbed Cartoon Network because they got this new head of the studio, and he goes, "We have two animation divisions. Why do we have two? We can just do it with one. It'd be a lot cheaper." So, yeah, what happened was when Warner Brothers bought all of Ted Turner's stations, Cartoon Network was one of them. Warner Brothers Animation became in charge of Cartoon Network, and that's when they hired me to work on Johnny Bravo. But then a couple months later, all the people who were still at the studio who were part of Cartoon Network cried to Ted Turner to call Warner Brothers and please let Cartoon Network be separate again. And they allowed it. They didn't have to, but they did. And boy, me and Gary Hartle, we are all Warner Brothers guys since Tiny Toons and Tasmania, and they did not like us at first. We were brought in by the enemy to do their shows, but we wore them down. They finally, accepted us.
Yeah, right on. So this kind of segues into Tiny Toons, Tasmania, and then leading into Animaniacs, Pinky and the Brain, and so on and so forth. So when you were hired by John for the StarToons studio, How would you say that the
Uh-huh.
whole atmosphere was like, being in Chicago? Because I think you guys were one of the few domestic like studios that actually worked, did animation in the United States, because the rest of it was outsourced to, there was TMS, there was ACOM, there was Wang Film Productions, and there are a lot of different animation studios working on, Tiny Toons. So when you guys were brought into the picture, um, how would you say that working with Warner Brothers, with Tom Ruger and the rest of the crew, how would you say that it was like getting to work with them at first, and how your business and relationship just kind of grew over time, just with the experience of working on Tiny Toons in Tasmania and so on and so forth.
Well, Tom Ruger just loved John McClanahan's animation, and rightly so. John's amazing animator. And John basically wanted to get a bunch of work. And to do that, he just needed a lot more people. He never really wanted to run a studio or anything, but he ended up doing that. And for the like 2 years I was there and the other guys, at the time were there, man, we had a blast making those Animaniac shorts. And, it's amazing how much footage we managed to get done. Because we did from like maybe the end of May of 1992 until October of 1993, we basically did 10 half hours, the whole studio together. And that's just a ton of footage to get done and to try to make it all look great.
Yeah, because I know y'all did. Let me see. I'm trying to remember because for Tiny Toons, I actually did remember something. So on the first season, I think John was doing some animation for the. There was this one other studio that did work on
Yeah,
Tiny Toons. Yeah,
Kennedy's Kennedy Cartoons
yeah,
up
Kennedy.
in
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Canada. And John worked for him. And I actually did the assistant work on a couple of scenes that John animated for him. And I never knew who he was at that time. But yeah, and it was kind of weird because Kennedy's biggest problem was he did like the same action all the time. And it just got really repetitive. He didn't really put a whole lot of thought into it. He just wanted to get as much footage done as possible. And, then there were some other, most of StarToons were people who were from Chicago working in either. One of the things John McClanahan had done was he taught animation at Columbia College in Chicago. And a lot of the people who worked at StarToons came from the classes he taught. So actually, when I worked there, I was kind of like an outsider. I was not from Chicago. But yeah, that was just really great times. We'd be yelling jokes back and forth between the cubicles and things. A lot of fun.
Yeah, because like I said, there were so many studios that worked on it from New Zealand to Japan, and it was just pretty much a huge collaboration project. It was a collaborative
Yeah.
effort. So for Tiny Toons, I think you guys did like a couple of episodes for that, and then you did Tasmania, and then you guys moved on to Animaniacs, which was kind of like the big project for you guys, and as well as Pinky and the Brain. So getting to work on Animaniacs was kind of like, such a big game changer. So when you moved up to the director's chair, because you did like a couple of episodes for that, how would you say that being in the director, just overseeing the production and everything, like how would you say that being a director has also greatly improved, like, collaborating with other animators and artists and just getting to learn about the animation production system, jumping from
Oh, yeah.
animating to directing?
You learn so much more by doing. And, we directed the show from when the storyboard came to us and did the animation for that storyboard. So I had an in-house animator working under me, James Tucker, who went on to be a producer for the Warner Brothers on the superhero shows. And he was great right out of the bat. And I had some really good assistant animators working under me. And, I just worked like a dog to get it done because we had 10 weeks to animate a short and you had to have it done. So, it was a lot of hours put in and can't help but get better working with a couple of really incredible animators like John McClanahan and Spike Brandt. So yeah, I learned real quick. It's kind of amazing to think about where I was in terms of skill level when I got hired and where I was when I left. And learned a lot of tricks, did some storyboards for Warner Brothers while I was there on the side. And yeah, it was just an amazing opportunity. I was so fortunate to be there, to be part of it.
Yeah, because there were so many different artists that that were at StarToons, and they quickly grew on. And y'all actually went to Warner Brothers, so it just kind of became like this, um, because when you meet up at some place, it just started becoming like, oh yay, the posse's going on to another, yeah, to more projects at Warner Brothers, which you guys started off freelancing for them, and then you actually worked with, the animation studio. So it's just really funny how it kind of ties everything together.
Yeah, they used to call us the Chicago Mob.
No way.
Yeah,
Oh man, I could kind of is it, wait, is it because when you say the Chicago mob, is it kind of like the yeah, I'm just kind of starting to think like I don't know, good fella or like the God which
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
saying that yeah, yeah,
Organized crowd.
organized crowd. And you know what? Yeah, now that I mentioned Goodfellas, the Good Feathers. Boom, there you go. Just kind of throw them in
Yeah,
there. Yeah. So I think it's really funny to me and it's a funny coincidence.
yeah. And I worked with those guys on I hired him to do some stuff when I was directing Pinky and the Brain, some character designs and some storyboard stuff. And a bunch of us ended up working on Space Jam from StarToons. And yeah, and I will hire those guys to do little bits of freelance stuff all the time because I know they're good. I mean, people complain it's so hard to get into the animation business, and they got to understand part of the problem is these shows cost so much money to make, and you really can't break people in unless they're at the professional level already. So that was one of the good side effects from working at StarToons is I had access to guides that I could call on if I needed part of a storyboard done for me, and I could use them.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just really thinking about going back to Animaniacs. Like, what would you say was some of your best, like, your favorite episodes that you've worked on? Like,
Well,
for
I'm
all
most
of the shows
famous.
that you've worked on. Yeah.
Yeah, I was most famous for directing the short Meet Minerva because of how sexy she was and how they wouldn't make any more of them because she was basically a sex symbol and not really. She wasn't a really deep character, to tell you the truth. It was just a series of gags, but they were fun gags to work on. And yeah, I think that one of the best ones I did was actually the first one I did by myself, which was Wally Llama. And that short came out really nice. And actually, Tom Ruger told me like 2 years ago that was out of all the shorts, that was his second favorite. So that was a nice compliment to get.
Yeah, those are really fun shorts. I think I'm gonna talk more about them in the next part, so stick around for more, folks, and we'll be coming back shortly, so stick around and stay tuned on Station Square. Bye for now. Alrighty, folks, we're back and live once again. Well, pre-recorded, anyways. But yeah, so last time I think I was mentioning about like I wanted to get to meet Minerva for a little bit because, yeah, that was it's an interesting story. Yeah, because I remember that she was in the intro during that shot where you see all the characters, but they only did
Uh-huh.
like two cartoons with her, and I think yeah, what you said, she was kind of like. She was there just I don't want to say like, she was a sex symbol, but it's more like it was just kind of like the two cartoons that she was in, and she didn't really have much. I mean, it was just kind of there just to have like, all these Tex Avery, like, the wild
Yeah.
takes and characters, fawning over her. And it was kind of pretty, it's really interesting when you really get into like how she was created and, and with the whole history beyond that. But I mean, the cartoons that she was in weren't really all that bad. It's just, at the time, we kind of have Hello Nurse on the show. And
Yeah.
she was
But
another character, we have Yakko Wacko Hello Nurse. And it
uh,
was kind of weird to have like two characters that are kind of more or less, I mean, I don't want to say that they had no personality, but it's kind of weird having two characters that have pretty much have the same shtick. There's the same
yeah.
jokes that is
Uh,
going on. Like the characters fall in love and then they swoon and fawn over them. So Minerva is kind of like another Hello Nurse in the show.
yeah. hmm
Yeah, when you
But I
really look at
guess
it that way. But I
I
mean, she
guess I've
does
been
fall.
told by
Yeah.
by um furries, the people who dress up in costumes, that it's like their favorite short that was done in the 90s. And they were telling one guy was telling me that I my cartoon was the reason for a whole bunch of babies being born in the 90s of furries hooking up. So I don't know how good or bad that is, but it's kind of funny.
Oh man. that Oh man. Like I'm just remembering and it was also kind of because I remember there was another short, but it was not by StarToons, but it
No,
was another short where Minerva falls in love with this werewolf, and I can kind of see why. It's because of Animaniacs with Minerva, and also just, yeah, I think that was kind of like one of the reasons why we have a huge furry fandom.
yeah, yeah. There was this guy who worked on the Bugs Bunny comic strip, and he also animated at Classics at Warner Brothers, doing commercials and stuff. I can't remember his name right off the bat. But when I was over at Disney doing Quack Pack, he was there working on that too. And every once in a while, he'd just come to work dressed up in one of his costumes because he actually made his own costumes. And he would just come in wearing it. And it's like, wow, man, that's weird.
No, like, yeah, it's growing into a phenomenon. That's all I can say.
Yeah.
You can say that, yeah. But yeah, I think that was the other short that aired first before Meet Minerva. I,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. They didn't run Meet Minerva until the second season.
yeah, it was like the next year, which was kind of bizarre. But, I guess the only two were made because, you know,
What's funny is she was created by Sherry Stoner. And the episode that I directed was written by Sherry Stoner.
oh, yeah, yeah,
But they
yeah.
call it sexist. And I go, well, how can it be sexist if a woman wrote it and created the character?
Yeah. Yeah, literally that because look, Sherry amazingly talented because she's
Oh, yeah.
also like a genius in her own right, but it really just confuses me that she specifically wrote that episode and yet it's considered sexist. Like I don't
Mm-hmm.
get it. Because she grew up watching the Looney Tunes and the Tex Avery stuff too and it's like why? And it's supposed to be like a throwback to all the the Tex Avery stuff. Like Jessica Rabbit, Roger Rabbit. I mean, hello. I don't think
Yeah,
anybody really had a problem with Jessica, but Minerva, I don't know, man. I don't know.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it was awfully fun to animate that stuff. I mean, that
Yeah.
was like back in the day at StarToons. What would happen was Tom Ruger would send a couple of storyboards to John, and then John would decide who gets to direct it. And I happened to see him with a great big FedEx box. So I knew what that meant. And I went into one of the little offices that was empty at the time. John went in there to look at the stuff because it had a flat desk. You know, it's much harder to set a bunch of stuff on an animation desk that's at an angle. So he pulled out these storyboards and I was just standing there. So I grabbed one of them and I started flipping through it. And it happened to be Meet Minerva. And I said, what do I have to do to direct this? Because I really want to direct it bad. John hadn't looked at it yet. So he flipped through it really fast and he goes, okay, I'll give it to you, but you got to give scenes to Spike and to me, which I did anyway. But everybody wanted to, draw the sexy mink. And I ended up actually animating about almost 2/3 of that show just because there was no one else to do it. I got Spike to do a scene where Minerva's got a box of Chinese food, and then Newt puts a bowl of horrible stuff into a cage, and he ends up catching himself. And followed by a couple of shots that I did, and then Spike did the jogging scene with Minerva, and John did the first transformation of Newt into the Big Bopper, and then he shoots off camera. And then I did all the rest of it, that big long scene where Minerva goes through all those takes, which of course was very fun to do, but took me about a week and a half to get all of that work done, which is still mind-boggling to me that I was able to get so much work done. I mean, I talked to a guy over at Disney Features one day, and he said, I worked for 4 months on 3.5 feet of film, which is 3.5 physical feet, which means it's about 2 seconds. And he worked for 3-4 months on that. I think my standard rate at StarToons was 40 feet a week. And I usually got somewhere in the 60s done. Now, some of it wasn't great. Some of it I think is pretty good and holds up all right. But some of it, I kind of cringe a little bit when I see it, even though other people say, oh, no, that's fine. But a funny thing would happen to me when I was at StarToons and animating, when I would get tired late at night, the drawings would get rounder. I know that sounds strange, but that's what happens. So I can point to scenes in Meet Minerva, and I probably did this at 2 a.m. because it's really rounded characters. Like when Newt's nose goes up into his head and he has to squeeze it out. That's not my usual style of drawing that character, but I did that animation. It's just, late in the evening, and my style kind of went a lot softer.
That was pretty interesting. Yeah. So, and it also kind of ties back into I mean, I know I'm going back to Roger Rabbit, but it really was a huge influence on animation, especially on Animaniacs, where you see a lot of it on, with the Warner Brothers. And I think if it wasn't for Roger Rabbit, there wouldn't be really so much of a big push for more animation. Like Steven Spielberg, I mean, was collaborating with everybody on these shows. And we got Disney and, Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon back in the day. So I think it was just something that was really special around that time. And for Warner Brothers, when you guys were working on all of these episodes and shows, and you ended up winning Emmys for it, which congrats. So, and I
Thanks.
just really think that it was just a really great time to just learn about so much about the business, animation, like just having being creative. It's so fun. And for your episodes that you did, giving scenes to animators and artists and just working on a lot of the stuff yourself. Yeah, because a lot of this was all done without computers. Like this was I
Yeah.
believe it was before the days of like, when animation was done digitally. So you got the traditional animation, like the old school way of doing it, which makes it really special to me. I remember also watching a lot of the Disney, like the episodes where you see on Bonkers or Darkwing Duck, and I know there was like a studio that they did in Australia that also focused on, really
Yeah.
strong posing, the faces, like this really expressive animation. And you guys also did that as well. And even on Ren and Stimpy, where you kind of have these characters that can just suddenly just go from one expression or pose to the next, and it just really flows just beautifully and cohesively. And I forget the name of the studio that did like the Stimpy's invention and stuff like that, but it's just kind of like
Uh,
brings
that,
back to mind. I'm sorry.
that was a that was a Vancouver studio.
Yeah,
I'm
the
trying to
name is
think of the guy's
escaping.
name, and it was
Yeah,
really small. The guy who did it was like him and his wife and two other people.
yeah,
It was tiny, tiny place, and yeah, he did some amazing stuff.
yeah, and it was that era of animation that just still really speaks to me. Like it's a huge influence on, the way that, with animation now. Yeah, because when you look at where we are today, it's kind of like in a really rough position. But for me, it just inspires, with me creating short cartoons. Like I'm somebody who is starting like an animation project, and I'm wanted to focus more on, making characters feel like, personalities and giving them these, really subtleties to them, the acting, specific character acting. That's something that I would love to do for, the shorts that, or just in anything that I create, just making characters just feel alive. And that's something that you guys did, what Disney did and what Ren did. Okay, I just remembered. It was Bob and Kelly. Those were their names. And the
Jakes.
studio was named
It
Jake's and
was his
Armstrong.
yeah, his
Yeah.
last name. His last
Car
name was Jakes with a Q.
Carbuncle. Carbuncle. It
Yeah,
just came to me.
Carbuncle
Okay.
Studios. Yeah,
Carbuncle
yeah.
Contracts. Yeah. Y'all, everybody, all of these studios just started around the same time, which is nuts.
Well, it was really weird. I remember one day after I'd been out in Hollywood for a year, I pick up the Los Angeles Times, and it's a big story on the entertainment section. It says, all of a sudden, animator is the coolest job in Hollywood. And yeah, it was really funny. And boy, for a while there, if you, a lot of people got agents to negotiate better deals for them with the studio because you were signing contracts back then. And but if you have an agent, you're gonna have to give up like 10 to 15% of your pay to the agent. So I always thought that what a waste. I'll negotiate my own pay. And boy, when they wanted me for Pinky and the Brain, my my salary nearly doubled just because I negotiated it up. And I had another studio wanting to hire me. Disney wanted to hire me at the same time. So, I played them off each other and ended up being the highest paid director at Warner Brothers, which, is nice.
Yeah. So I know that you did a lot of the animation for Meet Minerva, and also, I'm sorry. And I should also point out that with the cartoons that you did, the voice, the performances are just marvelous. I mean, I remember that this was back during the days when you had Andrea Romano just doing a lot of the Warner Brothers stuff, and the cast is just brilliant. And that episode, I believe Julie Brown was Minerva, and
Yeah,
Newt
yeah.
was, oh God, what was his name?
Artie,
Artie Johnson. Yeah, that was
yeah.
him. Yeah, who
from
passed away a few years ago. But yeah, there was
yeah.
just, and that kind of got me to wanted to ask this other question because for cartoons with like Wally or Minerva, which Wally also had some brilliant performances, just
Hmm.
great actors in general. So when it came to animating the like with the animation process, like back in those days, what would you say? Because you mentioned that it took you animated like two-thirds of Minerva. So how, and I presuming Wally Llama as well. So how much would you say that from beginning to end, from directing a show and then just have it get completed, like pre-production to post-production, how long would you say that each episode takes from the traditional animation perspective before everything was done all digitally? How long would you say that the turnaround time was for these shows and the deadlines
Well,
too? It's like
when I was
65, yeah, Animaniacs.
yeah, when I was directing Pinky and the Brain, we had 10 weeks to get a storyboard completed with all the character designs and props and everything ready to go out the door to ship to the studios. And we got another 10 weeks at StarToons to do the animation. And my crew was basically me, James Tucker, and whatever freelancer I could get a hold of that I thought could do, quality enough work, which there wasn't a whole lot to choose from. I mean, the animation business just went crazy back then, and everybody was working. So it was really tough to find someone, who had the time available to freelance for you. And, of course, the great thing about StarToons was they had a pencil test machine. So you could animate a scene and go over to the machine and shoot it and see if it worked. When I first was doing freelance when I was living in Minnesota, heck, I didn't have a pencil test machine. I had to just do it and hoped it worked. And I'd say a lot of it worked, but I didn't learn nearly as enough working on something without a machine to test the animation to see how it was going to look. Because boy, you'd shoot something, you'd take it back and redo two-thirds of it if it wasn't working. And of course, you'd find out if it wasn't working because you shot it. But um, yeah, it was great fun doing all that stuff. I mean, we thought it was like a huge privilege to be able to do these shows. And when we ended up going out to LA and meeting the people at Warner Brothers, they all like bowed their heads and stuff at us like we were some kind of animation gods, which was we all thought was pretty funny. But yeah, I have been so lucky throughout my career to have to just be standing there when certain things happened, and I was able to take advantage of it. When I got out of college, I worked at a commercial animation studio and learned everything about how animation is produced in the old 2D way. And I was around for the big animation renaissance of the 90s. And then after that, I basically did timing direction. So there was still a lot of stuff being done, but I could make a lot more money doing the timing direction as opposed to just being the overall director. It just, if you could do it fast enough, you can make a lot of money. It's kind of
Yeah.
funny. Some friends of mine now who were telling me at the time, "Oh, I couldn't do that. That's so boring figuring out all the action and all that." So I just want to draw pictures. And of course, now if they were an animator before, there's only a handful of people still out in Hollywood now that were animators that know actually how to do timing to be able to do sheets. And a lot of times now, to save money, they just ship the show without any timing in it, in the hopes that the overseas studios do something fun with it.
Yeah. After that, I so Animaniacs was definitely the big highlight where you got to direct episodes and you got to work on Pinky and the Brain. And then after the
Mm-hmm.
Warner Brothers, you know, after that, then you worked for Disney for like Quack Pack and some of the Disney afternoon stuff. and Warner Brothers, not Warner Brothers, sorry, Cartoon Network or Hanna-Barbera, really. Um, they did Johnny Bravo. It was Van Partible, but I actually didn't even know that he got fired. Like I didn't never knew that.
Yeah,
But
well, they
yeah,
had this bad business setup where someone brings in a cartoon, and at that time they would have this big thing on a Saturday where they'd go, everybody watch these new shorts and vote on which one should be a series. And so uh, one day they aired a whole bunch of cartoons, and Powerpuff Girls won, and Johnny Bravo was the second most voted on one. And that's how it became a show. But the thing was kind of unfair to Van was he never produced a show before. They just stuck him in the deep end of the pool and said, figure it out. And so inevitably, he did what he could with the knowledge he had at the time. But, he ended up going over budget on a bunch of his shows, which you can only do that so many times until they're going to like clamp down on you. But you got to give credit to Van. He made such a great character. It was so much fun to work on. And when interest for a movie came up, they hired Van back. And guess what? He was a much better producer because he had all that previous experience to go from. It is kind of nice now that at the comic book conventions, they are like honoring Van by having, panels and stuff, which they never did in the past.
no, it's like this for a lot of animation cons or comic cons where they invite creators to appear and speak about their experiences working with Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon. They have all of these honorees that have worked on all of these shows. I remember there
Mm-hmm.
was a panel that they did recently at LA Comic Con last year that I attended, and they had like the entire Johnny Bravo, well, not the entire cast, but like some of the crew and Johnny Bravo, like Jeff Bennett, Van himself was there, Candy Milo, and a few others. I'm so sorry. Yeah, it's been a few months, not even a month. It's been like so much time can go by after, a year. So forgive me if I'm leaving
Yeah.
anyone out. But anyways, they had like a panel dedicated to Johnny Bravo. They did a table script read and yeah, it's just you don't really get this stuff. I mean, with conventions back then, it was more for like the comic creators or just celebrities or whatever. But now it's like no, they want everybody. It's the actors. They have the producers. They have so much that is happening. Like everything has kind of all been evolving and changing over the years. And there
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't be any much of an interest for Johnny Bravo like at a Comic Con I guess maybe like 20 or so years ago, but now there's demand, so you never know what's going to happen. And same goes for
Yep.
the Powerpuff Girls, Dexter's Laboratory, Gendy Tartakovsky, Craig McCracken, and over on Nickelodeon you have Steve Hillenburg and oh yeah, by the way, happy 25th anniversary, SpongeBob. So I just really think that there's so much that is just for animation that's just been it keeps on growing and evolving and even on Johnny Bravo with so many people that have worked on it. I remember Butch Hartman and even Seth MacFarlane worked on the show and look at
Thought
where
there's
they
this
are right now. Yeah.
distance on Johnny Bravo.
Oh, I'm sorry?
Rachel McFarlane was one of our production assistants,
Oh
which
yeah,
is
yeah, yeah.
yeah. So we knew her really good. In fact, I gave her her first voiceover chance. She came to me and asked and read some lines and stuff, and I thought she did just fine. And I sent her over to our casting director, and she liked what she did. And so I can't remember. It was the one where Johnny ends up at like a SeaWorld kind of place, and she played the person giving fish to the sharks and stuff. And she's gone on. Of course, the fact that her brother is producing all those shows, he hires her as a voice actress all the time now. So she all started on an episode of Johnny Bravo.
Yeah, and she's also a marvelous singer too. I think the McFarlane family has got some singing chops because I think Rachel did like musical theater, and when you watch interviews, I love how she was like, "Look, I got a voice in some show at Hanna-Barbera," and you took a shot at her, and now she went on to do Kiss Next Door, American Dad as Haley. So, yep, she's definitely
Yep.
going places.
Yep. And
Oh, and
that's
also
always fun.
StarCraft 2 that I just found out recently. Wow, okay. Yeah, Billy and Matt.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was on a lot of Cartoon Network stuff way back in the day.
Uh-huh. And it's just people taking advantage of the opportunity. If you're ready for it when it comes, you will succeed. It's amazing with in the animation business, if you just happen to be in the right place at the right time. And that happened to me a lot of times. Even, let's see, I got hired to do to be this timing supervisor on a show for Sony called Jackie Chan Adventures. And it was really funny because I had just finished Johnny Bravo, and I was going with my family for a vacation in Hawaii. And the producer of Jackie Chan Adventures actually found out where I was staying, and they called me up and offered to interview me, as soon as I got back to LA. And another time I went on vacation and somebody found out where I was, wanted to hire me for something. It was actually kind of funny how that happened. Well, I'm out of work. I guess I better go on vacation.
Jeez. Yeah, and a thing that is really interesting to me about being an animation kind of fan and aficionado is finding character breakdown cheats or one of those, what do they call it, where when you're a director and you find an animation timing cheat and then you figure out who animated what scenes and
Uh,
yeah. I'm sorry?
yeah, that's very fascinating stuff. Most people don't know that there's an animation director that sits down and figures out how fast every movement of every character and every shot is figured out. And it takes people a long time to be good at it. And the people who are the best at it are people who animate it, because they actually drew the drawings and see how many drawings it took for a certain action to take place, and how you time a slapstick scene and get it to be so you get the most comedy out of it. And that was the great thing about working at StarToons. You did something, you could shoot it and look at it and get, visual feedback, bam, right away. You didn't have to wait until the show came back from Korea or the Philippines to see if what you thought was going to work indeed worked.
Yeah, right on. And you did mention how after you were working in animation for quite some time, you've had stints with Warner Brothers, Disney, and all of these other companies. And then you were talking about, your current endeavors. Where, because I know that you're living in, nice Minnesota, with your family and what have you. So what has been something else that you've been kind of, partaking in as of late? Just recently, what's new in
Well, I can't
Mr.
really do
Tingblad's life?
anything
Yeah.
anymore. So, I end up reading lots of books and watching movies. But yeah, I am unable to work now because of the chronic pain in my lower back, and which was caused by some damaged nerve that I have down there that make my brain think that I'm breaking my hips and my tailbone every day. But I don't really feel, people go, "Whoa, you got such a great attitude about it," and I'm like, "Well, I can't really do anything about it. There's no operation or anything that can make that better." But I try to find things every day to look forward to, and if there's a new show on, or a new animation feature to watch, it keeps me going. And hell, my career was so good I couldn't believe it when it was going on. I never thought I'd do all that stuff. I never thought I'd be a director of animation in Hollywood. I mean, that would be just insane.
Yeah. Do you also have like any favorite or interesting anecdotes about working with StarToons and then just, you know, doing everything that you've done in animation? What was some of the, you know, positive or most favorite memories that you have? Like, because I know you've
One,
discussed quite a few of them, but yeah, any interesting anecdotes that you want to, I guess, close us out on?
well, we were pretty politically incorrect back in the day at StarToons. One day I walked in, and Spike Brandt had done a drawing of a lobby card. Back in the days when they're at movie theaters, they would have lobby cards in the lobby of what's coming next week. And so he created this lobby card featuring these two characters called the Gerbil Brothers. And we did about 30 lobby cards and put them all up on the wall about these shorts that the Gerbil Brothers were going to star in, with all these double entendre titles and stuff. And what was really kind of sad was, right after we had done it, then John McClanahan's wife was giving somebody a tour of the place, and she asked them to hang out with John for a minute while she took down all those drawings before someone from the outside walked through and looked at them. And I guess one of the assistant animators, kept them all. So it would be very funny if you ever find them to post them online. We can all laugh back at that day. Um, yeah, we were all kind of in the same boat doing animation on that scale for the first time. And like when I went up to Hollywood, I got a job like right away. But what happened at StarToons was, the summer before it all fell apart, all of us animators ended up buying houses that we ended up living in for maybe 3 months, and then we're going to move to California. Well, poor Spike had put all his money into this house, and he didn't have any money when they cut his salary in half. So he stayed in our guest room for like 5 or 6 months to save enough money to bring his family out there, just because he had nothing. And it was really kind of great for me, because after the earthquake, there were driving to and from work got to be really, really slow, because a lot of things that were like 3-lane freeways got narrowed down to 1 lane because there was so much damage done to it. And so I got to sit in the car and laugh with Spike for like 3 hours a day. And that really helped get through something that could really be really boring if you had to sit there by yourself. And it would have been nice to have a tape recorder in there, because some of the stuff we came up with during those commuting trips were really, really funny.
Oh man, those must have been a treasure.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is anything that you want to close out with? Is there something that you wanted to? Because I know that you can't really do really much, but I just wouldn't want you all the best with your, with your health and everything. So
Well,
I'm rooting
thanks.
for you, and thank you so much
Uh-huh.
for doing this. And yeah, what I'm sorry, what were you gonna say?
um, I've met with people from my hometown, which is about an hour away from where I live now, the town is building itself a new library that's going to open up in a couple of years, and we're going to try to do um, like an art show of a bunch of stuff that I've worked on over the years, just to inspire kids from northern Wisconsin. Things like this can happen. Your dreams could actually come true. And granted, not everybody's going to end up being a director somewhere, but whatever your dream is, I'm living proof that yeah, that can happen. And hopefully when we do that, it inspires some young people into, hey, I want to do this. And maybe the next great director will come out of there.
Yeah, brilliant last words to live. Wow, last words. What are your final words? But yeah, anything that you want to also share, like socials, where can people find your work and give you support stuff?
Um, I'm on Facebook, and I have a Facebook page called the Cartoons of Kirk Tingblad, and you can go on there and scroll down and find little tidbits of wisdom about stuff I did over the years. Yeah, that's mostly the place. I don't have a regular web page of my that I run myself, just the Facebook ones.
Okay, and what's the piece of advice, well, the biggest piece of advice you want to close this episode on?
Whenever I
Finally.
meet some like high school kid that wants to be an animator, I look him in the eye and I always say, "How bad do you want it?" Because a few years ago, my mom gave me a box of stuff that I did when I was in high school. And of course, it's all awful, just absolutely worse than I ever remembered it being. And I look at a lot of these kids' work, and it's not that much different than mine was. But I really wanted it. I spent a whole ton of time trying to teach myself to draw and did stuff whenever I had the chance. And I always tell these kids, how bad do you want it? Because if you want it bad enough, you can find a way to get good enough to be part of the business in some way. Maybe you end up being a prop designer, you don't animate anything, but you get to be around the business and see a lot of stuff. I mean, one of the sad things is nobody ever sees any storyboards that are produced for all these shows. And it's like some of the best artists in the country produce storyboards for Warner Brothers and Disney, and you never see them. So that was a great treat for me all the time when I was in the business, being able to see all this great artwork that was being done while I was working there as well.
Thank you so much, Kirk. I really do appreciate it.
Sure, it's been
And who
fun.
knows? Yeah, who knows? Maybe we'll get more storyboards and lost media coverage in the next couple of years that we
Yep.
may or may not have had from the 90s. So you never know. Archivists, do your thing.
Yeah.
Internet archive. But yeah, thank you so much. And thanks for being an invaluable source of knowledge from the shows that you've worked on with Animaniacs and all the other stuff that you've done. And for those that are looking forward to this should be going up at some point. If not this week, definitely by next week. So stick around, and thank you for watching Station Square with Robert Jackson and Kirk Dingblad. And until then, catch you later, and adios amigos. Bye bye. Have a lovely day.
Bye.
And stay cool from the heat, please.
Yeah.
Take care, y'all. Later.